Welcome back to the SIGA Youth Forum, a great way for us to start 2021. Just a reminder that only last week we launched our SIGA Europe strategy, and you can learn over the course of the coming weeks and now on our website a little bit more details about our game plan for 2021. But the focus of the next 2 days is to showcase talents, both emerging and established within the sports business industry. And we've got some absolutely tremendous speakers, from brand new stars coming through who are starting their journey to established individuals who are making waves in boardrooms. Most of our speakers are 30 or under, and I just want to flag a little bit later in the week one of our older speakers, who is Paul Elliott. He's part of a panel on inclusion and championing diversity, and he's also in the mix to potentially be FA chair. Follow us on social media for a little teaser of that later this afternoon, and make sure that you tune in to the full panel. Demsime Waite and Katie Simmons from SIGA are also on that panel as well. And speaking of the FA, we've got Roya, the chair of the FA National Youth Council, speaking in our next panel. So let's move straight on to that. A reminder to engage with me as well. #StandWithSIGA and SIG Alliance, SIG, and then the full word Alliance is our handle via Twitter, and Instagram stories as well are very busy over the next 2 days. But this panel is called For A Sport with Values, and it focuses on race, gender, diversity and inclusion. I've already mentioned Roya, the chair of the FA National Youth Council, a brilliant individual who I met at the FA at an LGBTQ plus event about a year ago, just actually before the pandemic started. Rotimi, Taylor from the SIGA Youth Council, and Batuli are also speaking on this panel. And I'll hand you over now to our moderator, also from SIGA. It is a very good afternoon to Mayowa Kadri, who will take you through the next 45 minutes or so here at the SIGA Youth Forum.
Good afternoon, and welcome you all to the fourth session of the first day, and a really important session. I hope you've all really enjoyed the program so far, but I am honored to be hosting or moderating a conversation, a really important one at that, with some amazing people. Just as was mentioned before, we do have a chair of the FA with us, but we also have a professional basketball player. We also have someone who's building one of the hottest communities in terms of sport within London, and it's been featured in major publications. And we're fortunate to have a really renowned diversity and inclusion professional who also sits in SIGA. Before we get into this conversation, it's only right I let my panelists introduce themselves. And at Lucky Dip, I'm going to go for Rotimi first. If you can tell everyone who you are, what you do. And the sneaky question I mentioned in pre-production that I'm going to ask you is, when did you first initially fall in love with sport?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, cool. Hey guys, so my name is Rotimi. I run a climbing community called Climber. I founded it in 2019 because I was invited down to a climbing wall by a friend, and I had never been climbing before, but I was heavily into sports such as calisthenics, tennis, and so forth. As soon as I touched the climbing wall, I knew I loved it so much. I started posting stuff on like social media. Then from social media, I sort of garnered a buzz, and my friends started asking me, "Can I join you?" I created a WhatsApp group of 4 people. And in our first year, we've helped over 120 plus people. Well, first 2 years, we've helped over like 200 plus people get into the sport of climbing, which has been really fun to sort of host and be part of. What really got me into, can you repeat your question? What was it again?
What got you into sport?
What got me into sport? Okay, cool. So my mum, growing up, really loved tennis, and she's a massive fan of like the Williams sisters. So my first actually ever sport was tennis. So I started playing tennis at the age of 8 and continued all the way up to the age of 16. And I play here and there. But yes, tennis that got me into sport. My mum's love for it. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Rotimi. We'll now move next to, let's go to Roya.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. So yeah, my name is Roya. I'm 22 years old. And as mentioned quite a few times already, I am the chair of the FA National Youth Council. I guess basically what that means is we're a group of 10 young people. We're volunteers from across England. And our aim is to basically ensure that all young people have meaningful opportunities to develop themselves and positively impact the football community. So yeah, I guess believing that young people are the future leaders of tomorrow, but also they can impact football right now, today. So yeah, it's a very exciting vision. It's a very big vision. But using the power of football for good is, I guess, what we're about in the short of it.
And how did you get into sport?
So my first sport actually wasn't football, which is a bit of a letdown, I feel like. But I first got into taekwondo when I was 6 years old. I was a very sporty kid, you know, always like playing sports with the boys. But yeah, my first proper sport was taekwondo, and I've done that since the age of 6. I'm a 3rd degree black belt now, and I just like fell in love with kicking and punching people, apparently. Of course, that's not all of it, but yeah, that was kind of what got me into it. And I just loved the kind of fitness, running around, the freedom, and also the discipline side of it, and all the learning that came with it, really.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Royal. We'll now go to Batuli.
Awesome. My name is Batuli Kamara. I am currently a professional basketball player, but a project near and dear to my heart. I'm the founder and CEO of Women and Kids Empowerment. We work to educate, equip, and empower young girls through sport, education, and social entrepreneurship skills. One of the biggest reasons people usually ask me why social entrepreneurship skills, and I say sport is so transferable. There's so many skills, and what better way to kind of work through those skills than in business? And so that's a huge focus for us in our organization. And for me, I fell in love with sport through freedom. I'm a first generation Guinean, but I was born and raised in New York. And my mom was terribly feared everything outside, in a large city and raising kids. And the only way that I'd be able to go outside was when I started playing sports at the age of 12 years old. And I remember going to my first, the moment I fell in love with it and I knew that sports was bigger than me was I was going to Virginia. I live in New York, going to Virginia, like a 6-hour trip, and my entire family came and saw me off. And I just remember getting on the bus and my entire team is like, Batuli's tribe has come to see her off. And I was so mortified. But it was a big deal, for me at the age of 14, going and traveling to a new place. And my family saw how sport impacted my life in a positive direction. And now being able to do that for other young girls who are the first to ever leave their house, and not for reasons of marriage, but for sport and for experience and for holistic growth, has been absolutely amazing for me. So that's when I fell in love with it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Last but not least, we have Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm Taylor. I am the secretary of the Sega Youth Council. So it's been a great pleasure to plan this youth forum alongside my fellow youth council members. I'm also a mentee in SIGA's Global Female Mentorship Program. We're currently planning an event next month to highlight female leadership in sport. So stay tuned for that. And perhaps most appropriate to this panel, I am a member of the Standing Committee on Race, Gender, Diversity, and Inclusion. So looking forward to learning alongside you all, but also sharing as much as possible. As to how I got into sport, I grew up in a college town in the US. And so seeing the way that sport can uplift the community and galvanize a town made me want to get involved specifically in diversity and inclusion. I think it's really important for people to feel seen and valued through the possibility of sport. And I'm sure that I'm not alone on this panel in those sentiments. So looking forward to a great discussion.
Amazing. So that is our esteemed panel. I guess it's time for us to get into the discussion. I'm a firm believer, in order to kind of understand where you're going, it's important to assess where you are and where you've come from. And it's really important for us to take into context where we are in the world at the moment. We are all currently talking online due to a global pandemic. And there's a lot that's happening this time. Within the global pandemic, we've seen the birth of the biggest civil rights movement ever. We've seen loads of people be in a raw moment of stillness where people tend to be alone with their thoughts, or they tend to be consolidated with information that's granted to them more. And the product of that is we've seen more conversations about things traditionally or prehistorically we weren't getting a lot of movement on, namely the treatment of Black people within sports, race, gender. And because of the stillness almost, we're able to have these conversations a lot more better than we have previously. So in order to understand how diversity and inclusion can actually help sport or make it sport for values, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you guys? I'll probably start with Rotimi in terms of what you do and the community you've built.
Yeah, sure. So historically, the sport of climbing hasn't been a diverse sport. So even when I started my community, my initial thought wasn't to sort of create a diversity statement in climbing. It was just to bring my friends together to climb, right? And just due to proximity, most of my friends are Black. So majority of the time when we do enter climbing walls, we are the sole Black people at the climbing walls, which is really funny because like you can see how we're so different. We're loud. We bring this type of energy, this vibe, which is completely different than your norm. So we're always going against the norm. So for me, diversity means in the climbing space is just not seeing us as different, right? Seeing us as just normal climbers. A lot of the time we get this modifier of Black climbers, right? Instead of just climbers, right? Because historically, the climbing scene has been seen as just a predominantly white sort of middle class sport. And I think it's what we're doing with what I'm doing with my community is trying to show that there is like an array of different people who are, you know, who are interested in sport and perhaps didn't know about the sport and perhaps through my community, have gained an interest in the sport. And that should just be normal. That should be a thing where you should just want to climb regardless of your race, regardless of like gender or anything like that stops you, holding you back. So I think that's me.
I totally agree with you, and I think that point at the end is quite powerful about if you want to do something, you should be able to just do it essentially. And I did ask a trick question when I asked how did everyone get involved in sport, because ultimately all of those answers stem from because I liked the look of it. I wanted to do it, and I went to do it. But I guess as you go through your sporting journeys, depending on terms of your background or your race, you may tend to start, your sexuality, etc. You might start to see things that you look at and you go, hold on, or gender, you look, why am I not afforded the same opportunity as someone else? Or why do I feel the way I feel within sport? And it's almost against everything you kind of first learn as, as a small child, you go to sport and you're just having fun. So as someone who's a professional basketball player and having moved around a lot, Batuli, how does it feel being within sport, but knowing that due to various reasons, you may not be afforded the same opportunities as people, or you're seen different despite being on a level playing field and being the same as everyone around you, essentially?
I think that that's a great question. And initially, when you asked the question of what do you think of diversity, for me, we don't talk about diversity of thought enough. You enter a space and you're just like, we're the same. We may look the same, but we have completely different experiences based on our upbringing, based on just what's around. And how do we then create spaces of inclusion that allows everyone and cultural norms for us to be diverse in our thought and our experiences, and in who we are and what we want to represent. And so for me, having moved around a lot and had so many different experiences on the court, it's just so important for me to, they always say, be water, but being flexible and being open enough to say, we may look the same, but this is a new and a shared experience. And I have so much to learn from you that you have to learn from me. And I don't think enough in the sports space, we talk about holistic development. We are whole people that come into these spaces, and you just don't transform and, leave everything outside. You bring that experiences there to who you're with, and being able to create, safe spaces for people to just experience one another is really, really important. And that has been the key for me throughout my transition as I'm currently here in Spain and fully immersing myself to the ideas and thoughts and possibilities of what I'm here to learn and what people are there to learn from me.
I really like that point about diversity of thought, because you're right. It's not just about how we are, it's about who we are, how we think. And for me, I know when we kind of emailed beforehand, I did mention about a lot of the time it's D&I.
Mm-hmm.
The I sometimes just gets pushed under the carpet. And Taylor, this is probably a question for you in terms of all of your endeavors and things you've been a part of. How important is the I word in the D&I? Because diversity, of course, is there, but inclusion seems like one that maybe gets forgotten about. And how important is that if we ever want change within sport?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a famous quote from a vice president at Netflix, Bernie Myers, which is diversity is being asked to the party and inclusion is being invited to dance. And I think inclusion is the action part. It is an affirmative, deliberate decision. I look at it as diversity, it can be a matter of fact, where inclusion is a choice. It's when we actively endeavor to change our mindset and our organizational culture for the better. You know, if we had a board of people with decision-making power and they look around and they decide, you know, let's improve our hiring practices and let's have a more diverse board, but they don't change the organizational culture that welcomes people who are different, that welcomes different ideas, then what was it all for? So that's why it's so important to have diversity and inclusion together.
I totally agree, and I don't think there's anyone who's viewing or within this place now that probably doesn't. And Roy, that brings me to you because, of course, we're actually friends. I believe I'm your friend. We've known each other, and one thing that's always stood up about you is you've always put yourselves in situations where you can influence change, and you're in a position right now where you chair the National Youth Council, but also with your work with FBB, you kind of have two views on this, right? You've got a ground up perspective and you've got sort of a chair position where you can kind of influence. So based on your two positions, your beliefs at the center of who you are and everything you stand for, how important is it for someone like you to have influences at both ends of the spectrum almost?
Yeah, I'll confirm we are friends. But I guess it's invaluable. I think, you know, there's nothing worse than people making decisions when they're not, you know, listening to people or speaking to people or seeing the real world or the real way that life is for individuals. There was a really good point that was made about, you know, even though we might look the same, you know, we're individuals and we have our own experiences. And I think, yeah, understanding that and understanding what the young people want. And I think if I'm speaking specifically as like a young person, the power and influence I have in these positions is, it is to a certain extent. And it's kind of a whole new world when you allow a young person in a room with an opinion to voice that opinion. And I know we're talking about diversity of thought. If you want that, young people have to be in the conversation. We have to be, in fact, not just in the conversation, but at the forefront of these conversations. And FBB gives me the kind of opportunity every single day to work with young people in schools in deprived areas of England, and put their voices at the forefront of, I guess, what we're doing. And then to be able to do that in football, in other areas of football, and also on the top of the agenda of football is, yeah, I think really powerful. And I try my best to, yeah, do that and represent us very well. And I think that there's steps to come in terms of involving more young people, because at the end of the day, I am one young person. I can't represent everyone, even if I do have all these different circles. So yeah, it's great progress, and I feel very privileged to have that opportunity to represent young people. But I can't wait for more and more to come.
I think one thing that is great as well is because of naturally the position you find yourself in, where you're working with young people and you're sitting on a youth council, you actively get to bring their views to a place where they're heard and they're listened to, and hopefully action can then take place. And this is all great, but there is something we definitely have to discuss. And it's about, if we kind of have all of this free game and know that this is how things should be done, why has it taken so long for there to be change? Why are we still having these conversations ultimately? Why are we not in a place where we can look at sports in general and go, you know what, this is equal for all?
Yeah,
I'm going to open
sorry.
to you. Yeah, I'll let you go again.
Sorry, yeah, I'd just say, and again, I'm going to kind of talk from that youth perspective, but for me, there is this kind of lack of investment and a lack of value placed on young people. I always hear the phrase like, oh yeah, you know, you're so important, you're going to be the leaders of tomorrow. And it's like, well, what if tomorrow never comes? You know, we're not going to live in a very good world if we're constantly waiting for young people to sort it out when they're older. And I think there's that lack of like, we want to hear you now and we think you have positive solutions. I don't think we're investing enough in developing our young people and opening up those pathways and making those pathways inclusive. And yeah, that's probably a big thing that I'm trying to push at the moment, is how do we invest in our young people and value what they have to say.
I completely agree on that. And that's one of our core focuses at Wake, and a position that I think is so important, because for me as a young person, I was so energetic, I was so passionate, but it's such a disconnect when you're passionate about something, but you don't know how to describe it. You don't know how to get your point across. And we've seen kids spearhead movements across, I always say TikTok and they get so mad at me, TikTok, Facebook and these, revolutions. But then it's like, where's the action? How do we then empower them to put that, into policy change and to word that and to do it in a strategic fashion, so taking action has been amazing, because that's been the easy part. And I always start off when I talk to young people and say, are you willing to fight for change you may never see happen? But to know that you play such an incremental part of this and that building block, it's important. But are you willing to? And they're usually like, yes, and that's an amazing feeling, because, there are, small steps to change. But I think you hit the nail on the head. Being able to really empower them through action and through changes and through a strategic way is definitely what we have to do. And at our camps, we do a lot of self-actualization. Who am I? Who am I without my sport? Who am I at the core? I stand as one, but I'm 10,000. Who do I represent for my community? And how do I display that? And how do I take action in a positive way?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with both of you guys' sentiment. I think it is what you said. I think you said something about policy, and I think it is investment. I think it's on a grassroots level. There needs to be people like us on the panel, sort of making those impacts and those changes. But I think on the board level, I think those changes need to be sort of like incorporated in policy. They speak to a more macro perspective, where we're speaking to a micro perspective, right? So I think those changes need to happen twofold, and not just only spearheaded by sort of young people. But I think what we're seeing is that we're not seeing more people who look like us on those board levels, who can sort of like reason with us or who have the same sort of trail of thought as us. And unfortunately, it's incremental change instead of like more sort of exponential change, which should be happening straight away, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree as well. I would just add that it's important to empower young people, and it's important to listen to young people, but it's also important for organizations to put forth the economic investment in the initiatives that young people want. I've heard budgets be described as moral documents. They reflect what you prioritize. So if you say you care about young people, if you say you care about diversity and inclusion, put forth the economic investment, the long-term economic investment, so that we can have the transformative change needed.
Yeah, I really agree with all points, especially what you're mentioning now, Taylor. I believe there's studies that have actually shown that by having diversity of thought, diverse people, you actually makes you economically better. Because you have so much thought and different skills and different aspects that you can really attack everything that needs to be attacked. And what we've kind of delved into now is, because of how things are, we've all naturally become more invested in making sure that from a grassroots, we can empower people to help the communities around them and really empower them to push forward, which is great. But there is that other battle of that glass ceiling, that if that is not more diverse and inclusive, then how will they ever understand? If we just look at it naturally, if people from the same backgrounds, same social groups, etc., have all had the same experiences, how are they then supposed to relate to anyone else if they only know what they know, and in some cases not open to speaking to people? And for me, it's a continuous battle that I've seen in football, where I've gone into rooms and I've looked around and I said, okay, this doesn't look like me or anyone else at all. But when I look at the football pitch, it's a bit different. Then when I look at the coaching staff, it doesn't look like anyone at all. And then I look at the fans and it's like, okay, it's a mixed bunch. Why is there such a discrepancy in what's going on here? And for me, one thing that definitely brings up is we see a lot of the time that there are methods that people take, or institutions take to try and push diversity and inclusion, whether it's the Rooney laws or anything of that sort of nature? What is the thoughts in the room about that sort of procedure to try and aid there being a space where ultimately you've got more people who are not just carbon copies of each other?
I think Taylor said it, exquisitely, literally, that, that budget is a moral document, but so many people, they just want the Band-Aid approach. Simply put, we're going to come in, we're going to fix it, we're going to hire somebody. But if the institution and the program doesn't have enough to support that, it's going to fall through every single time. So just keeping it short and simple, I think Taylor said it perfectly. You need to create the programming to support that, to support those people in those roles to really get the change that you want to see.
Because, yeah, one thing that definitely stands out for me is we've talked about the D, we've talked about the I. For me, there's an E, and it's a lot of people often call it equality. But I think of it as equity, because ultimately, if everyone was given the same opportunity, if people are at different disadvantages, are you really pushing up a group to be where they need to be? So one example of this for me is within football. It's well documented that young boys from Asian communities are not often got the pathway or the chance that their counterparts have. And for me, it's, okay, if you just give the same to what you're giving to everyone, is that really helping? Or do you need to make sure that there's an additional push to make sure that they are fortuned the same opportunity? And I think it's something that happens at board level as well, where we go back to the inclusivity topic, where, okay, so you've made a program which is tailored to, have people who are from different backgrounds apply. But when they then go through that process or maybe get there, are they granted the opportunity to really be informed or make informed decisions based on their beliefs, based on what they've seen, based on their experiences? Or is it essentially what we fear with a lot of diversity and inclusion, another tick box exercise? What is the thoughts in the room about that sort of issue that occurs?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I think again, it comes back really strongly, I think, to the work we do around if you kind of just try and bring people in and have that tokenism, that's again where you're not looking at the young people and the people that are going to come through, or developing the people that kind of that matter or that are going to matter, because there's this instant like, what can we do right now? Let's just solve the issue, stick a Band-Aid on it, as you said. I would call it a plaster, but stick a plaster on it and solve the issue. Whereas really, and looking at what we do, if we look at our county FAs in football, they will have a council or a board or some form, and we want them to have a youth council. Now, if they invest in this youth council, they develop them, then these are going to be the people that you're nurturing them, you're giving them that extra opportunity or the support that they need to get into these rooms, and you're showing them that these rooms are accessible, they are open. I think one of the other things we do that's been totally invaluable is giving young people a mentor that's in the industry, that's a profession, and they work with them for a whole season too, if the young person stays in youth leadership. And again, it's all about nurturing, supporting that young person. So actually, you're not just sticking someone in a room and going, oh, well, we gave you the chance. You're actually giving them the tools to thrive.
Tuli, you mentioned something that it really hit home for me, and it was the quote about, are you willing to do stuff now that you may not see the result of? And the reason why that hits home is because I have a few mentors who have done things within the media space or football, and they always tell me that right now the situation is better than they could have ever imagined, but there's still a lot to do and a long way to go. And they often say they may not see that change in their lifetime, which sometimes when you think about it, it's quite, we tend to live long lives, don't we? Touch wood, nothing happens. But when someone says they may not see that change in their lifetime, it's quite damning, especially when we talk about all of the things that should be done. What can we do to make sure that change is accelerated and that we can potentially see the change within our lifetime?
I think once I figure that out, I'll win a Nobel Peace Prize. I'll just take it and run. But I think just setting out of what are the small goals. We have to be able, especially with young people, we have to be able to celebrate small wins. And what does that look like? And at different fronts, because sometimes the change that you're looking for doesn't always come in that way, but it comes in the way that it needs to take it a step further. So I'm a huge proponent of small wins, really setting out and being, pure in your intentions and what you want to do and why you want to do it. Because there is, small progress and a lot spaces. Again, me playing professionally in hijab, I've had friends who fought for me to play in hijab covered, and for me to be the first player in this league to now be covered and playing the game I love. That was 2 years ago, and I didn't know she was fighting for me. So I think there are small wins along the way that you have to be present enough to recognize.
On that note of small wins, Rotimi, with the sort of, the collective that you've built, what sort of advice would you have to anyone else who kind of sees something and maybe thinks, you know what, this isn't for me? What would you kind of say to them? Because like you've mentioned at the top, the community you've built is going from strength to strength. People recognize it as a real force and a real great thing that's happening. But if you didn't take that decision that day, people may not have the safe space to do this amazing sport and amazing activity, which is so great. So what advice would you have to people that want to potentially start something, but are not sure about the way to go about it?
Yeah. Just do it. Ultimately, we live one life, right? And I hate to take the quote from Drake, but sometimes YOLO, right? Sometimes just go with it. Like, I think there's something great about having a growth mindset and not seeing your present situation as the only situation that can sort of manifest in your life. I think there's something really important in having a mindset that says that no matter what the outcome may be, even if it's an L, even if it's a W, I'm still going to take that, I'm still going to take that journey, because there's going to be lessons learned along the way. And for me, like, I wasn't into climbing before, but I'm a sporty person. So if you throw me in any sport, it could have been snowboarding, and I might go back and I want to start a community, because I think there's something really important, just bringing people together. And I think you enjoy sports, even me, because I used to play basketball, and I really enjoyed the aspect of having sort of that brotherhood, that sort of companionship, and bringing people together. So I think if you have a desire to do something, I don't think nothing really sort of stops you from doing it. Maybe economically, and that's a different conversation maybe we can have. But like, I think if you want to do something, you just do it.
I like that advice a lot. Taylor, this question's is going to be for you, but to give context, this year, or the tail end of last year into this year, we've seen a young gentleman in the UK who's managed to do so much with his platform. I'm sure you've probably heard of him. His name is Marcus Rashford, and because he believed in something, he has managed to make the government make 2 or 3 U-turns. They're now calling him the leader of the opposition, and this is all coming from him just standing by what he believes in. And the reason why I find that quite unique is it's almost belief in what you want to do, galvanizing support and pushing it forward, which then causes change at the top. If we were to then apply that to what we're talking about in terms of race, gender, diversity, inclusion, what sort of things, or how can people galvanize their movement to create that major change that needs to happen at the top? Because it's all well talking about what we're talking about now, everyone's doing amazing things on the ground, but that second half of the deal still needs to be done. What things from what you've seen in terms of, because I know you've worked for MLB, you've done so many things, how can we make that connect, that once we push things forward, that we can then, either go to these boards or speak to people in power and say, okay, this is what we've done, we need a change to come?
I think it comes down to having more effective diversity, equity, as you mentioned, and inclusion strategies. I think a lot of times, I'm sure you all have heard this, sometimes when someone is, I think, trying to be well-intended, they may say, oh, I don't see color. No, let's see color. Let's see ourselves. Let's see color vividly. Let's embrace what makes us different and use it as an asset. I think another issue is related to this panel with race and gender and incorporating that into diversity, equity, and inclusion is we deal with those consecutively. We want to talk about race, and then we want to talk about gender, and then we want to talk about sexuality or other identities, but that's not how they manifest in us, and that's not how we negotiate those identities. So it's really important that we look at how our identities may help us, may hinder us, and I think about someone like Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality, and who is an amazing scholar with critical race theory and Black feminism. And so I just want to give her flowers. But it's really important that we, take a more nuanced look and take a more advanced look into developing these strategies beyond, a lot of the recommendations that we hear, into having more effective strategies that really bring forth the change that we need. You think about someone like what Marcus has been doing, really galvanizing that. It takes for us to really look at, these identities and really embrace them to bring forth the change that we really so desperately need.
Sorry about that. No, I agree. And I feel like possibly because of all of the stuff that's happening at the grassroots level, the younger generation believe that their voice means something. They believe that if they come together, they're a strong force. And by continuing to push about things they're passionate about, we get into a place where things can change, and things are changing quickly. We've got a few questions for the crowd. One here is quite interesting, and it says, it's from Richard, and it says, should all international sports federations be required to set up advisory committee boards, such as the English FA's Inclusion Advisory Board, that advise sports organizations on gender, racial, disability, LGBTQ plus matters, and help with the creation of strategies? Should it be mandatory that sporting organizations have to have boards like that?
Well, I mean, speaking as someone who was on the Inclusion Advisory Board and has recently passed it on to my vice chair, it's a really, really valuable group, and especially, if we want to make progress, they are a key kind of stakeholder group within the FA. So yes, speaking on my experience of that, it's been positive.
So for me, I feel like I said, there's so much power that comes from diversity of thought and diversity in general, that it should be there. And ultimately, you don't get these thoughts in the room unless you have everyone there. I guess what the interesting part of it is, when you look at organizations, who then kind of implies that it becomes mandatory over these organizations is one thing. And two, it's, for me, what also stands out is it's about how that is kind of the upkeep of that. Is it done because it's like, okay, I don't want to be the party that doesn't do this? Or is it done because you want to make it a force of good? Have you got the right people in the room? And that's where sometimes I feel that some people can kind of get away with things almost, because it's like, okay, we've set up the board, but that board doesn't really have a voice. They're talking, but there's no anything coming through it. And it's a real worry that I see in some sports. In other sports, like you mentioned, Roy, that it works perfectly. But how can that perception change, where we are actually giving power to people to create change? When we don't just have a board because we want to be seen as doing a tick box activity or doing the right thing.
I would just add quickly that, yeah, it goes back to that final thing you said about, you have to give the group power. Like, if you're just having this group and you talk to them and that's it, and they say something and you're just like, yeah, that's great, but we're not going to listen, then there's no point in having a group. So I think we say it with County FA youth councils. I think these groups, their powers need to be written into articles, written into policies, written into documents. Because that's the only way, they get funded and they get invested, and they then hold value and hold power.
I would agree.
I would also say, taking that a step further, there's a hint of privilege in that. just to have access to these programs. You know, not every organization has the ability to do that. So for those who may have the opportunity and the access and the privilege to do so, you know, working with smaller organizations to equip them with those programming as well. Because, you know, that's the first thing I think about. You know, there are so many organizations that I know would love this, I mean, are true to that, but may not have the financial means or the privilege to do these kind of programmings that are absolutely necessary in the communities that they're working with that are so diverse and are at the grassroots level. So I would say being able to really work hand in hand with other organizations within their community and supporting them in that way as well.
I definitely agree.
Yeah, I would.
No, after you, it's me.
Oh yeah, I was also going to say, like, it's definitely a financial sort of element to it as well. I think to keep these companies accountable in one sense is that you do need transparency for them. And I think we're living in an era, especially a social media era, where we're holding sort of these big corporations accountable, whether it's like who they vote for politically, or what you do with their finances, right? And I think if we are if we want to keep them true or keep them on their toes, I think we have to sort of hit them in their pockets and ensure that economically they're making decisions which are sort of beneficial for all people and not just for their friends.
I like that.
I would say briefly, authenticity shows, and if you're engaging in a form of performative or kind of voyeuristic inclusion, it's when you're not empowering those who are traditionally marginalized in your organization. You know, I'm reminded of after the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, we saw a lot of organizations put a lot of very carefully curated statements, but not a lot of action behind that. So in relation to sport, you know, sport is not exempt from this. So your authenticity has to be authentic in order for it to be longstanding and effective.
That's definitely facts. And I guess with the communities that we're empowering from a grassroots level, we can almost make sure that they can keep account of bigger organizational institutions that are saying things, and hopefully that sort of pressure is what enables us to go in the right direction. Another question that came in, which is I'm quite interested in, is how do we differentiate equality from equity in the context of sport? So for me, instantly, one thing that kind of jumps out for me straight away is when I see any sort of initiative take place, I always kind of see a rebuttal in terms of why is that being pushed? So for instance, Black Lives Matter versus, oh, but all lives matter. And for me, it's the education about, yes, we know the latter is true, but the reason why this message needs to be pushed right now is because if you look at the way these people are treated and marginalized, they have less opportunity, or they have been pushed so far back that in order to get it back to a place where, you know, it's right for all, they need a bigger push. When you have that conversation, sometimes people understand it, but I feel like a lot of the time with campaigns, it's just seen as, oh, we're just doing it for one person, why are we not doing it for all? Whereas it's about trying to re-educate and get to that space of thinking where that group needs it. If you look around you, would you feel all right if you was treated like that and they would treat like this, or you had this head start and they didn't? Why is that happening? How the way to fix that is we need to grant as much opportunity as we can. That's my personal view on it. What's the thoughts in the room on that question?
It's a great question. It's a great question. We're thinking of
I don't mind going with kind of an example, I guess, of it kind of aligns with what you were saying. And yeah, I guess an example is always a good way of showing it. But when the FA National Youth Council first was set up, it kind of ran into this was kind of before my time, but it ran into a very obvious problem that you get in football, of that only men were on the National Youth Council. It was a really male-dominated space. So every year we run a FA Leadership Academy. It used to be a camp. It's all about getting new youth leaders in, giving them an amazing experience, and then developing them across like 12 months, keeping them in the game, etc. And one of the camps, I think it might have been in 2015, county FAs had to nominate their women's officer or someone who was passionate about women and girls football, which then brought, you know, like 60 new females into the program who absolutely loved it, got that experience, who maybe previously wouldn't have been picked for the opportunity. So I think that's a bit of like a practical example. And I guess all that kind of work that's kind of gone before and after that now means that myself and the two vice chairs of the National Youth Council, we're all females. It's kind of gone the other way now, but I guess that's a bit of like action, as we were saying, and kind of giving them that opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes it has to be done, because having a chair or a group that it's just all men is not representative of the sport of football. Therefore, how can we encourage to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to represent in the right way? We have 3 questions left and we have about 3 minutes and a half, so we're probably gonna have to fly through these. So first one, how can youth contribute to change with diversity in associations and federations where they have traditional values and don't give much opportunity for women, men from different backgrounds to work in higher positions such as management and coaching in sports? So I think this is kind of what we discussed in the sense of how do we kind of get that shift where what we see in positions of power, what we see maybe in sport is different. Taylor, do you want to take this one?
Sure. I think it comes into investing in young people, as we mentioned. You know, if we want to talk about recruiting or hiring practices, that has to start with young people, and it has to start with empowering them with decision-making power. So that's why I'm really proud to be a part of the CDA Youth Council. You know, I think we've all had an experience where we apply for a job and it's an entry-level position, but they want, you know, 3 to 5 years of experience. How does that work? So you have to give people the opportunity. And related to the idea of equity, you know, equity would recognize that there are certain marginalized groups, whether it be due to race, gender, what have you, that historically have not had that opportunity, but are just as qualified and would bring so much to the opportunity. So if we're going to improve our practices in regards to recruiting and hiring, we have to start with investing in young people and investing in marginalized people so that they're no longer on the margins.
Amen.
I agree there. The next question is, talking about diversity, how can sports organizations support more physically disabled young people who dream of a career in sports? Which is a really nice question. And I like the fact that career in sports is mentioned, because a lot of the time, the discussion around sports is, oh, you play, you coach, you do this, you do that. When for an industry that is so big, there's so many different roles within sports. But how do we encourage individuals who may not think they have that accessibility to pursue loads of options? Rotimi?
Yeah, sure. I generally think it's a case to voices being heard, and making sure that those voices aren't sort of marginalized, aren't sort of pushed, aren't sort of ostracized to the side, and actually listened to. I feel like, obviously, I'm someone who's an able-bodied, I've never really had to really think through about that question before. But I definitely think it's speaking to those people who are sort of like in those positions and making sure their voices are elevated. And so they are seen in media, because I think media plays a massive role in sort of impacting career decisions and sort of sports we play as well. So I think it's doing sort of those things, that education on a grassroots level, and sort of making sure there's visibility for them. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree there. I think visibility and granting opportunity, not just in one space, but across as a whole, saying, you know what, there's so much here that can be explored, is the way we overcome that. The last question is quite nice. So it's from Ebert, and it says, how can Rover assist in advocating for a conducive sports environment for young talents, using their platforms and on the hand enhance diversity in sports? sometimes just giving your platform for conversation is enough, because that can be heard, and just really pushing people into spaces where whoever they're trying to empower, they can go on and do that is the way for, like this conversation now is a prime example that we're having. People are able to actually have this conversation, spread the word and keep moving. We've spoken about a lot and there's a lot to take away. Thank you guys so much. And I hope everyone enjoys the next 2 days as the timer runs close to 0. But yeah, amazing conversation. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
You.